I think it's important for us to talk about why there's so much conflict about immigration. That is, why is it sometimes so difficult and challenging for people from one country to welcome newcomers from different countries and from different cultures? Now, much of the controversy is about undocumented or illegal immigration or the immigration system. There's a separate page for that. Hopefully, you've already gone there, and if not, I encourage you to go there. But but that's about how people arrive, controversy over how people arrive. I think there's also controversy over, look, once people are here, once foreigners are here, why do we struggle to accept them sometimes, and can we do something about it? And so I have a whole chapter in the book about that I encourage you to read, but let me try to give you some of the highlights on this. First, let's talk about why it's difficult for societies to welcome newcomers. Look, there's at least three factors that contribute to that. First, there's psychological factors. Second, there's just misinformation. And third, there's also a concerted, targeted campaign that supercharges the first two. Let me go through each one of those. All humans need to belong to a group. This is like something that psychologists know very well, right? You don't need to be a genius to realize that, right? We all feel that we need to belong somewhere, okay? To a family, to a sports team, to a school, to, whatever. And that's good. That is part of why we form social groups. But psychology tells us that sometimes that need to belong leads us down the wrong path, okay? Because we fall into something that's called social categorization. That is, we categorize people into in groups and out groups, and we favor the in group at the expense of the out group. And this is very common, as you can see, with people from other nationalities. Okay. And so it's normal that when a group of people from a different country comes in, the in group that was already there kind of worries, hey, are they gonna, are they gonna harm me? Are they gonna change my culture? I kind of don't like their language, their food, whatever. And so we form into in groups and out groups. And, we have to sort of learn to, over time, get over that. The problem is that those psychological biases often lead into the second issue, which is misinformation. Because of the distrust we have of outsiders, we're very prone to accepting misinformation. Okay. We think that, say, foreigner, for example, in the United States, and in actually most immigrant receiving countries, natives tend to think that immigrants are lazy, right? They tend to be very distrustful of the religions and languages and customs of foreign born people, and to the point where misinformation is very rife. For example, people believe that immigrants commit crimes at much higher rates than they actually do, something we've talked about on another page. People think that immigrants use welfare or social services at a much higher rate than they actually do. In Christian countries, people significantly overestimate the rate of Muslim immigrants and significantly underestimate the number of Christian immigrants. So these misconceptions are very common, again, because of these psychological things that lead us to like automatically want to believe that. But the third problem is the one that I worry about the most. There is, for political reasons, a lot of advantage in taking that misinformation and supercharging it and taking advantage of those biases. In the United States, for example, there is a concerted, very well funded, very well organized, and politically very savvy anti-immigration movement that doesn't represent the majority of the population. In fact, 70% or over 2/3 of Americans think that immigrants are good for the country. Only a minority think that immigrants are bad for the country, but that minority is super passionate. It's the main issue that they worry about. It's the main issue that they vote about. They're very well funded. They have a very consistent message, and they have a disproportionate influence in the media and in how we talk about immigration. What I mean is they supercharge the misinformation and they play on those psychological biases I talked about to anger people and garner votes. Now, in this video, I'm not going to go through the whole story of the anti-immigrant movement in the US, but in a conversation with Stephen Dubner on Freakonomics, I covered that story. We've made that clip available for you to listen. And that group is responsible for much of the misinformation and anger that we have about immigrants in this country. The same is true today in countries like France, the UK, Italy, et cetera, you name it. There's always sort of a minority that has a very strong anti-immigrant message, but that minority has a disproportionate influence. So those three reasons, psychological biases, misinformation, and political groups that are not in the majority but are very passionate, explain a lot of the reason why there's animosity towards immigrants. Let me add a fourth reason that I think we also need to talk about. It's not the main reason, but it's an important reason. When a big group of newcomers settles in a place, sometimes they cause congestion, right? In the short term, there's a higher demand for housing. The classrooms and schools can get a little bit crowded. Hospitals and other infrastructure is taxed, and that's just because we tend to be very bad at quickly adjusting and building infrastructure. That sense of congestion also creates animosity. That's real. There is research showing that sometimes rent and the price of housing can go up when a lot of immigrants arrive very quickly. That is a real issue. But the only thing I want to say about that for now is that the wrong solution is to kick people out. Your community is way better off with those new people. The right solution is to think of how we can build infrastructure faster and more effectively. Because in the long run, that's really what's good for us. And immigrants contribute their labor to build that infrastructure. But it is an issue. We have to deal with that. And it's often just because we're bad at building infrastructure. So we've talked about these four reasons that it's hard for us to accept newcomers. Something that's behind it is this sense of scarcity that when newcomers come, not only are they going to steal our jobs, but there's not going to be enough room for my kid in the local daycare. Or if I go to the emergency room, the doctors will be busier. There's some interesting research on this actually, showing that psychologically, people focus only on the increased demand for services and infrastructure. But what they don't realize is also that a bigger population increases the ability to produce all of those things. So let me give you an example, right? You're worried that a newcomer is going to take your job, but you don't realize that a lot of newcomers also create new jobs because they've made the economic pie bigger when you realize. But we somehow have a psychological bias that leads us to overestimate the demand on services and resources and to underestimate the additional capacity for production of those resources. That's again a psychological bias that explains why we struggle with this. But actually, it doesn't take that much to take a pause, think about it, and realize, wait, new people, yes, they consume more, but they also produce more. And therefore, it's not a zero sum thing. People are not like other resources in that they're limited. People are unlike other resources, is that they actually can grow the pie when they work together and when a population becomes larger.